Most NFL careers follow predictable arcs. Drafted, developed, peaked, declined. But occasionally you get a player whose journey breaks every mold. A story best told through the different versions of himself he became along the way. Today, we're breaking down the 7 distinct evolutions of one quarterback who transformed more times than anyone thought possible. From the small-town Texas kid who rebuilt a losing program to the Super Bowl MVP who silenced every doubter, each level reveals a different Jalen Hurts, a different mindset, a different skill set, a different destiny. And the beauty is that every transformation was necessary for the next, stacking into a championship story nobody saw coming. So let me take you through the 7 levels of Jalen Hurts, the most unlikely evolution in modern football. Level 1, Foundation Builder, Jalen. This is where we meet the original Jalen Hurts, the 16-year-old who walked into a weight room and decided to engineer his own greatness. He wasn't blessed with elite height or a cannon arm, so he built something else entirely. An unbreakable base of strength, work ethic, and a winning mentality. Jalen Alexander Hurts was born August 7th, 1998 in Channelview, Texas. He didn't walk into a football factory. He walked into a program that hadn't reached the playoffs in 22 years. 2 decades of Friday night disappointments had numbed a community that almost forgot what winning felt like. From day one, he was different. His father, Avarian Hurts Sr., wasn't just cheering from the stands. He was Channelview High's head coach. Football in the Hurts household was a 24/7 lab where discipline, work ethic, and the psychology of winning were studied like school subjects. While other teenagers played video games, Jalen lived in the weight room. As a sophomore, he famously squatted 500 pounds and starred as a 198-pound class powerlifter. Less about chasing numbers, more about engineering advantages when you don't have prototype measurables. The results spoke for themselves. As a senior in 2010, he threw for 2,384 yards and 26 touchdowns, while rushing for 1,391 yards and 25 more. Over 3,700 total yards and 50 total touchdowns combined. And more importantly, he led Channelview back to the playoffs for the first time in 22 years. One player refused to accept the status quo, and the program rose with him. That's what foundation builders do. Recruiters noticed. The 4-star from Channelview earned an Elite 11 finals nod and the attention of Nick Saban. The foundation he poured at home had prepared him for the biggest stage in college football. But even foundation builders have to prove it all over again at the next level. And Jalen's next level was about to get complicated. On June 5th, 2015, Jalen committed to Alabama over other SEC powers like Texas A&M and Mississippi State. He was choosing a perennial national title contender, a place where the expectation wasn't merely to win, but to dominate. The foundation he'd poured at Channelview had prepared him for college football's biggest stage. But even foundation builders must prove themselves again at the next level. And Jalen's next level was about to get complicated. Foundation builder. Jalen learned a truth that would define his career. Greatness isn't inherited, it's constructed. Brick by brick, rep by rep, game by game. He took a broken program and made it whole. Most importantly, he learned you don't need perfect circumstances to create excellence. You engineer your own advantages. This version laid the groundwork for everything that followed. The work ethic, the leadership, the refusal to accept limitations. But foundation builder Jalen was about to meet his greatest test. Level 2, freshman phenom. Jalen. Level 2 introduces us to a completely different version of Jalen Hurts, the teenager who walked into Alabama and immediately rewrote history. This wasn't the small-town kid grinding in relative obscurity anymore. This was a true freshman starting for the most demanding program in college football, performing under pressure that would have broken most 18-year-olds. Jalen Hurts entered Alabama in 2016 and made history. He became the first true freshman to start at quarterback for Alabama since Vince Sutton in 1984, and the first ever to do it under Nick Saban. His impact was immediate and devastating to opponents. The numbers from his freshman season were absurd: 2,780 passing yards and 954 rushing yards, an Alabama single-season record for a quarterback on the ground. He threw for 23 touchdowns, ran for 13 more, and totaled 36 touchdowns, breaking Alabama's single-season mark. His 14-1 record as a starter gave him a 1933 winning percentage, the best by a true freshman quarterback in SEC history at the time. He was named SEC Offensive Player of the Year, SEC Freshman of the Year, and earned Freshman All-American honors. His sophomore season in 2017 was just as commanding. Alabama went 13-0 in the regular season with Jalen as the starter. He improved his completion percentage to 60.4% through 17 touchdown passes with just one interception and continued terrorizing defenses with his legs. One of his most memorable moments came against Mississippi State when he delivered a game-winning 26-yard touchdown strike to Devonta Smith with just 25 seconds remaining. By January 2018, Jalen Hurts had compiled a 26-2 record as Alabama's starting quarterback. At just 19 years old, he already owned one of the best winning percentages in program history and seemed destined for individual awards, NFL stardom, and a permanent spot in Crimson Tide lore. Then came January 8th, 2018, Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, the college football playoff national championship game against Georgia, the moment that would define Jalen Hurts' character forever. In the first half, Alabama's offense sputtered. Jalen completed just 3 of 8 passes for 21 yards, though he added 47 rushing yards on 6 carries. The bigger problem was Alabama's inability to move the ball consistently against Georgia's defense. At halftime, Alabama trailed 13-0, and Nick Saban made a decision that shocked the football world. He benched Jalen Hurts for true freshman Tua Tagovailoa. This wasn't a garbage time substitution or an injury replacement. This was the head coach of Alabama telling his 6'2" starting quarterback on the biggest stage in college football, with more than 28 million viewers watching, that he wasn't good enough in that moment. Most players would have imploded. Most 19-year-olds would have demanded a transfer, complained to the media, or poisoned the locker room. Jalen did none of those things. He stood on the sideline, supported Tua, and watched his backup lead Alabama to a 26-23 overtime victory and a national championship. The grace Jalen showed in that moment revealed something extraordinary about his character. He understood that winning mattered more than individual glory. He chose team success over personal recognition. He demonstrated a level of maturity that most adults never reach. But the test wasn't over. The 2018 season became Jalen's year in purgatory. Relegated to backup behind Tua, he made just 10 regular season appearances. The media speculated about transfers. Coaches promised starting jobs elsewhere, but backup Jalen chose the harder path, staying at Alabama, mentoring teammates, and preparing for whatever opportunity might come. That opportunity arrived December 1st, 2018, in the SEC championship game against Georgia, the very team present when he lost his starting job, with Alabama trailing 28-21 and Tua injured with 11:07 remaining. Nick Saban turned back to the quarterback he had benched 11 months earlier. Backup Jalen delivered perfection, 7 of 9, passing for 82 yards and a touchdown, plus 5 carries for 28 yards and the game-winning score. 2 fourth-quarter touchdown drives completed the largest comeback in SEC championship history. His 15-yard rushing touchdown with 1:04 left sealed a 35-28 victory and a playoff berth. That moment crystallized everything about Jalen Hurts' character: resilience under pressure, grace in adversity, and the ability to perform when it mattered most. He had faced his breaking point and emerged stronger than before. But this was just the beginning of his transformation. Sometimes the greatest players need to leave their comfort zone to discover their true potential. Level 3, the Transformer. Level 3 is where we meet the Transformers, the rare players who completely reinvent themselves when everyone else assumes they've already peaked. These aren't small adjustments or incremental growth. These are total metamorphoses, the kind that force you to rethink what's possible in football. On January 16th, 2019, Jalen Hurts announced his graduate transfer in the Players Tribune. After 35 games at Alabama, he was leaving Tuscaloosa for Norman, Oklahoma, to play for Lincoln Riley and the Sooners. The choice was no accident. Riley had become known as the quarterback whisperer, the coach who had just guided back-to-back transfer quarterbacks Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray to Heisman trophies. If anyone could unlock the full scope of Jalen's passing ability, it was Lincoln Riley. Riley's power raid offense was perfectly suited to Hurts' skill set. By blending air raid passing concepts with downhill power run schemes and heavy use of RPOs, Riley forced defenses into impossible decisions. More importantly, he encouraged Jalen to play loose, trusting his arm talent, taking risks, and attacking defenses vertically in ways Alabama never allowed him to. The transformation was immediate and stunning. At Alabama, Hurts had been carefully managed, asked to make safe throws and rely on his legs when plays broke down. At Oklahoma, Riley handed him the keys to the entire offense. For the first time, Jalen wasn't just a runner who could throw. He became a quarterback who could dominate both phases equally. The statistical explosion proved it. He threw for 3,851 yards and 32 touchdowns against just 8 interceptions, completing 69.7% of his passes. His 11.3 yards per attempt led the nation. On the ground, he rushed for 1,298 yards and 20 touchdowns, an Oklahoma record for quarterbacks. In total, Hurts accounted for 5,149 yards of offense, averaging 367.8 yards per game, one of the highest single-season marks in FBS history. His passer rating, an elite 191.2. It wasn't just the numbers, though. It was how he got them. His intermediate accuracy sharpened dramatically. His deep ball turned lethal. His pre-snap reads became quick, confident, and surgical. Riley's system had unlocked the quarterback people doubted he could ever become. By December, Jalen was sitting in New York as a Heisman finalist. He finished second in the voting to Joe Burrow, earning 762 points and 12 first-place votes. In a single season, he had gone from Alabama backup to one of the most decorated players in college football. Then came the ultimate test, the college football playoff semifinal. The Peach Bowl against LSU and Burrow, a showcase of the two Heisman finalists, turned into a brutal reality check. LSU, on their way to one of the greatest seasons in college football history, dominated from the first snap. Burrow threw for 493 yards and 7 touchdowns, while Jalen managed 217 passing yards and 43 on the ground. By halftime, it was 49-14, and the Sooners were finished. That game was humbling, but it didn't erase what Hurts had accomplished in 1 year. The transformation was real. He had proven he could thrive as a high-level passer, not just as a run-first athlete. He had shown adaptability across systems and coaching philosophies. Most importantly, he had revealed that his ceiling was much higher than the skeptics believed. Now the NFL would have its say. At the 2020 Combine, Jalen reminded scouts of his raw athleticism, a 4.59 40 fastest among quarterbacks, and a 35-inch vertical. His record as a starter, 38 wins to just 4 losses, spoke for itself. His leadership and character were praised universally, and yet many draft analysts still projected him as a 3rd or 4th round pick. The doubts lingered about accuracy, processing speed, and whether his Oklahoma numbers would translate against NFL defenses. Then came April 24th, 2020. With the 53rd pick in the 2nd round, the Philadelphia Eagles shocked the league by drafting Jalen Hurts. The reaction was swift and brutal. Walter Football called it the worst pick of the draft so far.
What's your reactions to the Jalen Hurts selection?
I don't know. What?
This is the worst draft pick I've ever seen in my 20 years covering the NFL draft.
Eagles fans erupted in disbelief. With Carson Wentz signed to a massive long-term deal, drafting a quarterback so high looked like organizational malpractice. But those critics missed what was really happening. Philadelphia hadn't just drafted a backup. They had invested in the most important thing in football, the power of transformation, because sometimes the greatest reinventions happen when no one is watching. Level 4, the apprentice. Level 4 is where we meet the apprentices, the players who don't enter the NFL as saviors but as students. They're the 2nd round picks sitting behind established starters, the developmental projects, expected to learn quietly in the shadows. Most apprentices never graduate to stardom, but every once in a while one gets thrust into the fire early and changes everything. Jalen Hurts entered the 2020 season in that exact position. Drafted 53rd overall, he was expected to contribute in a handful of special packages while watching and learning behind Carson Wentz. Instead, what he walked into was a franchise quarterback unraveling in real time. Wentz's 2020 season wasn't just a slump, it was a collapse. He led the NFL in interceptions, 15, turnovers, 19, and sacks taken, 50. His completion rate cratered to 57.4%, ranking 31st among qualified passers. By December, The Eagles were 3-8-1, their offense broken, and Doug Peterson's job hanging by a thread. On December 8th, 2020, Pederson made the call that changed the direction of the entire franchise. He benched Wentz and handed the reins to Jalen Hurts. His debut came against the 10-2 New Orleans Saints, a defense that had stifled quarterbacks all year. Yet Jalen brought an energy the Eagles hadn't felt in months. He completed 17 of 30 passes for 167 yards and a touchdown, while rushing 18 times for 106 yards. Philadelphia snapped its 4-game losing streak with a 24-21 upset. What stood out wasn't just the numbers, it was the poise. Jalen didn't force throws or crumble under the pressure of his first NFL start. He played within himself, took what the defense allowed, and used his legs to extend plays and sustain drives. For a team on life support, he looked like a spark of hope. Over his 4 starts as a rookie, Jalen went 1-3, but the flashes were undeniable. He threw for 1,061 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, while rushing for 354 yards and 3 more scores on 5.6 yards per carry. Even in losses, he looked competitive, composed, and capable of leading an NFL offense. The Eagles reached the postseason in 2021, and Jalen got his first taste of playoff football in a wildcard matchup against Tom Brady's Buccaneers. At just 22, he became the youngest quarterback in Eagles history to start a playoff game. The result was a 31-15 loss, and his stat line, 23 of 43, 258 yards, 1 TD, 2 INTs, showed both growing pains and potential. The turnovers hurt, but the moment wasn't too big for him. He had gained something no rookie box score can capture: experience against greatness. The loss ended Philadelphia's season and Doug Peterson's tenure. In came Nick Sirianni, who installed an offense tailor-made for Jalen's skill set, an RPO-heavy, run-first attack that leaned on his mobility while gradually building confidence in his passing. The results came quickly. In 2021, Jalen completed 265 of 432 passes for 3,144 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. His completion percentage climbed to 61.3%, a noticeable jump from his rookie year, but it was his legs that truly changed the Eagles' identity. He led all quarterbacks with 784 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns, becoming the engine of the NFL's top-ranked rushing offense. What mattered most, though, was leadership. The Eagles started the year 2-5, written off by most analysts, but Jalen rallied the team, guiding them to a 7-2 finish and a surprise wildcard berth. His calm presence, combined with his relentless work ethic, turned a broken roster into a playoff team. The postseason rematch against Tampa Bay was another humbling lesson. The Eagles lost 31-15, and Jalen's performance showed progress but also limitations. Still, the message was clear. This was no longer a temporary apprentice. By the end of 2021, Carson Wentz had been traded to Indianapolis. The Eagles had found their franchise quarterback. Jalen Hurts was no longer the understudy learning from the bench. He was the starter, carrying the weight of a city's expectations on his shoulders. The apprenticeship was over. Now came the real test. Could he move from promising starter to one of the NFL's elite? Level 5. The peak of Level 5 is where we encounter the rare few who reach the summit. The quarterbacks no longer judged as prospects, but as true elites. These are the MVP candidates, the Pro Bowlers, the faces of franchises carrying cities on their shoulders. For Jalen Hurts, the 2022 season wasn't just another chapter. It was his masterpiece. From the opening kickoff, it was obvious this wasn't the same Eagles team, and it wasn't the same Jalen Hurts. Philadelphia exploded out of the gate, starting 8-0 for the first time in franchise history. The precision was sharper, the decision-making quicker, the confidence undeniable. What had once been a promising young quarterback had now hardened into a superstar. The numbers proved it. Jalen threw for 3,701 yards, 22 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions, completing passes at a 66.5% clip. His 101.5 passer rating ranked among the very best in football. On the ground, he added 760 rushing yards and 13 rushing touchdowns, the second most ever by a quarterback in a single NFL season, behind Cam Newton's 14 in 2011, It was the kind of dual threat dominance defensive coordinators dread. Sell out to stop the run and he'd torch you through the air. Drop too many bodies into coverage and he'd carve you up with his legs. Certain games became showcases of that unique brilliance. Against Green Bay, Jalen attempted just 28 passes for 153 yards, but he gashed the Packers for 157 rushing yards, the most ever by an Eagles quarterback in a single game, in a 40-33 victory. Against Tennessee, he flipped the script, throwing for 380 yards and 3 touchdowns, while rushing for 78 more in a 35-10 dismantling of the AFC South champions. A.J. Brown, facing his former team, caught 119 yards and 2 scores as the connection between star quarterback and star receiver grew into one of the league's deadliest duos. The Eagles rode that balance to a 14-3 finish, tying the franchise record for wins in a single season and locking down the NFC's top seed. Jalen's 35 total touchdowns matched Sonny Jurgensen's legendary 1961 campaign, but the context was entirely different. Hurts was doing it in an era of heightened defensive speed, all while redefining what a modern quarterback could be. The MVP conversation came down to 2 men, Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. Mahomes ultimately claimed his second award, but Jalen finished second in the voting, earning 1 first-place nod and the universal acknowledgement that he was now among the NFL's elite. He was named to his first Pro Bowl and awarded second-team All-Pro honors. The postseason only reinforced his rise. The divisional round against the Giants was a 38-7 demolition, with Jalen managing the game to perfection as the defense smothered New York. The NFC Championship game against San Francisco became almost anticlimactic when the 49ers lost both quarterbacks to injury. Hurts was efficient, throwing for 121 yards and rushing for a touchdown in a 31-7 win that sent Philadelphia back to the Super Bowl. Super Bowl XI in Glendale was billed as a clash of eras. Patrick Mahomes, the face of the league, against Jalen Hurts, the rising challenger. What unfolded was one of the greatest quarterback performances in championship history. Hurts went 27 of 38 for 304 yards and a touchdown. He rushed 15 times for 70 yards and 3 more scores, setting a Super Bowl record for rushing yards by a quarterback and tying the overall record for rushing touchdowns in a title game. By halftime, the Eagles led 24-14, with Hurts responsible for every touchdown. His 1-yard score in the first quarter, his 26-yard burst in the second, and the unstoppable tush-push at the goal line showed a quarterback capable of dominating in every possible way. But football's cruelest truths live in the fourth quarter. Kansas City roared back, outscoring Philadelphia 24-11 in the second half. Harrison Butker's 27-yard field goal with 8 seconds left sealed a 38-35 defeat. The loss was crushing, but Jalen had done everything possible. He had outplayed Mahomes statistically, carried his team's offense, and authored a performance that belonged on the short list of greatest Super Bowl efforts ever. That game cemented Hurts' place among the NFL's elite. He didn't just belong on the same field as the best, he belonged in the conversation with them. The Eagles knew it too. In April 2023, they rewarded their franchise cornerstone with a 5-year, $255 million extension, including $179.3 million guaranteed and the first no-trade clause in team history. At the time, it made him the highest-paid player in NFL history. For a franchise once fractured at quarterback, the message was clear. This was Jalen Hurts' team for the next decade. At just 24 years old, he had reached the peak. An MVP runner-up, a Super Bowl star, and one of the faces of the league. The only question left was whether he could stay there, and the answer would come much faster and much harsher than Eagles fans wanted to believe. Level 6, the Valley. Level 6 is where stars find themselves stripped bare. Not the backups who never made it, not the prospects who fizzled out, but the established icons who stumble so publicly that their very legitimacy comes under fire. This is the Valley, and for Jalen Hurts, it came faster and harsher than anyone expected. The 2023 Eagles began the year as Super Bowl favorites, roaring out to a 10-1 record that made them look unstoppable, but the dream unraveled almost overnight. Philadelphia lost 6 of its final 7 games, collapsing from juggernaut to wildcard team in the blink of an eye. What had looked like another coronation instead became one of the most shocking late-season meltdowns in recent NFL memory. Hurts bore the brunt of it, After throwing just 6 interceptions in 2022, he tossed 15 in 2023, often looking rushed and unsettled against aggressive blitz schemes. Defensive coordinators seem to have found the blueprint: send heat, take away the middle of the field, and force Hurts into hurried throws. The turnovers piled up, and so did the questions. The losses were brutal and very public. San Francisco humiliated them 42-19 in Philadelphia, exposing defensive holes and stifling Hurts for 4 quarters. The Cowboys crushed them 33-13 on national television. The Seahawks, led not by Geno Smith but by Drew Lock, stunned them 2017 in a game that symbolized how far the Eagles had slipped. By the time the playoffs arrived, the aura was gone. On January 15, 2024, in Tampa Bay, the Eagles were embarrassed 32-9 by the Buccaneers. Hurts completed 25 of 35 passes for 250 yards, but the stat line was empty. He was pressured relentlessly. The offense went 0 for 9 on third down, a franchise playoff record for futility, and Philadelphia looked utterly lifeless. Just 1 year removed from nearly winning a championship, they bowed out with a whimper. For the first time in his career, Hurts wasn't just facing critics of his style, he was facing critics of his legitimacy. The whispers grew louder. Was he just a system quarterback? Did Nick Sirianni's scheme make him? Was 2022 a fluke? Anonymous reports surfaced about friction between Hurts and Sirianni. National talking heads shifted their tone from future MVP to buyer beware. This valley was different from Alabama in 2018. Then, being benched for Tua was about circumstances and matchups. Now, the criticism was existential. Could Jalen Hurts really carry the weight of being a $255 million franchise quarterback? Every interception felt heavier. Every loss looked like an indictment of the extension he'd signed months earlier. The mental challenge was immense. At Alabama and Oklahoma, Hurts was surrounded by overwhelming talent that masked flaws. In the NFL, especially at the highest salary tier, there are no hiding places. Every weakness is magnified by opponents, every mistake broadcast on loop, every flaw debated endlessly on sports radio. Once again, Hurts was left with a choice. He could blame the defense, point to injuries, or claim the coaching staff had lost its way. Or he could take ownership and decide the valley was not the end of his story, but the proving ground for what came next. The 2023 collapse became that crucible. The Eagles were broken, the city was restless, and Jalen Hurts' reputation teetered on the edge. But history had already shown what happens when you bet against him. The valley wasn't the conclusion. It was the setup for the most important transformation yet. Level 7. Broken. Jalen. Level 7 reveals the most vulnerable version of Jalen Hurts. Not the developmental project or the forgotten backup, but the established superstar who stumbled from the mountaintop and questioned everything he thought he knew about himself. The 2024 season opened with enormous pressure. After the collapse of 2023, critics were circling, and the whispers of system quarterback were louder than ever. The Eagles started 2-2, and familiar doubts resurfaced. But during the bye week, everything shifted. Jalen and Nick Sirianni rebuilt their relationship brick by brick, while the arrival of Saquon Barkley gave Philadelphia a new identity, a ground-first, punishing offense. The turnaround was historic. The Eagles won 14 of their final 15 games, including a perfect 16-0 record in contests Jalen started and finished after the bye. His efficiency was surgical: 68.7% completion, a 103.7 passer rating, and a 36-4 touchdown-to-turnover ratio. Barkley became the perfect partner. His 2,005 rushing yards, 9th most in NFL history, and 2,283 scrimmage yards powered an offense that was almost impossible to contain, while Hurts' dual-threat balance kept defenses off-kilter. Together, they became the league's most devastating tandem. The playoffs turned into a coronation. Green Bay fell 22-10. The Rams fought but folded 28-24 on Barkley's unforgettable 78-yard touchdown. Washington never stood a chance in the NFC Championship, crushed 5-23. Philadelphia was marching, and Jalen was leading with calm inevitability. Super Bowl Lex in New Orleans became destiny fulfilled. Facing the same Chiefs who had broken his heart 2 years earlier, Jalen seized the moment from the opening snap. By halftime, The Eagles led 24-0. Kansas City's offense, Patrick Mahomes included, was held scoreless on its first 9 possessions. The second half was theater, not suspense. Hurts found A.J. Brown for a 12-yard score, then connected with Devonta Smith on a spectacular 46-yard dagger that sealed the game. The Eagles won 40-22, but the score didn't capture the dominance. Hurts was flawless, 17 of 22, passing for 221 yards and 2 touchdowns, plus 72 rushing yards and another score. His 103.4 passer rating, his precision, and his command made him Super Bowl MVP, the youngest Super Bowl MVP quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger, age 23 in Super Bowl XL. More than a ring, it was vindication. He had avenged Super Bowl VIT against the same opponent and denied Kansas City its three-peat. The championship validated everything, from Channel View's weight room to being benched for Tua, to reinventing himself at Oklahoma, to enduring the 2023 collapse. Every level of Jalen Hurts' journey had been preparation for this night. The 2025 season began with Hurts as the unquestioned face of the franchise and the Eagles as defending champions. They started 3-0, beating Dallas in the kickoff game, crushing Kansas City in a rematch, and rallying past the Rams. Jalen's early numbers, 479 yards, 3 TDs, 0 INTs, 70.3 QBR, silenced any talk of flukes. His story became bigger than stats. Yes, he owned the NFL record for consecutive games with multiple rushing touchdowns by a quarterback, 16. Yes, he was climbing toward Eagles' career records in rushing scores, 55 and counting. Yes, his $255 million contract and $179 million guaranteed confirmed his value, but the numbers alone couldn't capture what he represented. The 7 levels of Jalen Hurts tell a deeper truth: the power of reinvention. Foundation builder Jalen proved greatness is constructed, not inherited. Freshman phenom Jalen showed he belonged on the biggest stages. Backup Jalen embodied grace in adversity. Oklahoma, Jalen reinvented his game. Apprentice Jalen proved he could survive in the NFL. Peak Jalen reached the mountaintop. Valley Jalen endured the fall. Broken Jalen transformed collapse into redemption. Champion Jalen became the proof that the deepest valleys make the highest peaks possible. At just 26 years old, with a Super Bowl MVP and a ring, Hurts has lived 7 lives already. But if history tells us anything, it's this: the evolution isn't over. The 7 levels may feel complete, but for Jalen Hurts, they might only be the prologue to something even greater.